Please unmute. My guest today is Bob Stone, a mixed reality pioneer since 1987 and an emeritus professor at the University of Birmingham. Bob, you have one of the most impressive career histories I've ever seen. I'll look at my notes now. A chartered psychologist, a specialist in human factors for defense and teleoperated subsea, nuclear and space systems, and a researcher for the UK's National Advanced Robotics Research Centre, to name but a few of your roles. However, it seems like the 12th June 1987 was a real turning point, the day you became a VR, virtual reality convert. Tell us about what happened that day to change the course of your career to get you where you are today.
Well, you listed quite a few important stages in my roller coaster career, because that date, 1987, was when I was actually undertaking research for the European Space Agency on telerobotics in low Earth orbit. And I was sat in a conference at NASA Goddard, just outside, well, in fact, in Maryland, US. I was fortunate to be invited to come over and see what NASA was doing in terms of satellite maintenance. And I met this wonderful guy called Steve Ellis from NASA, but from the west coast of NASA, or the west coast of America, NASA Ames. And he said quite glibly, well, you're over in the States, why don't you just pop over and see what our human factors team is doing? So, being very naive at the time, I thought, yes, I'll pop over to San Francisco. Of course, it took as much time to get to San Francisco as it did to get from the UK to Washington, DC in the first place. But it was a complete game changer. They showed me a variety of human factors, things that were going on in their labs. But one in particular, which involved putting on this very strange lashed together headset with a couple of Radio Shack pocket TVs. And put on some gloves that were bristling with fiber optics. And they instructed me to look at this moving platform, this escalator, which is in wireframe, really primitive graphics, for very good for the time. Stand on the bottom and tell us what happens. And my vision was telling me that I was going up. And as I was going up, I could look down and I could make out that I was actually ascending in space. But my inner ear balance mechanisms were saying, no, you're not, you're standing still. So I was getting this incredible experience of moving or being moved in a virtual world. And they were looking at using this technology to investigate, again, human factors for future astronauts, doing things like coordinating activities outside the International Space Station. And I thought, yes, now this is it. This is all about human factors. This is a tool where I can start investigating concepts for aerospace, robotics, defense, healthcare. And I saw that at the time and I came back to the UK a completely changed person.
What does human factors mean?
Well, human factors, very broadly speaking, it's a study of the relationship between the human and his or her working environment. And it's evolved since probably around prior to the Second World War, but originally it was looking at things like cockpit design, things like designing chairs, designing tables, what we in the UK for many years called ergonomics, and in the States it was called human factors. But it really is looking at how humans can adapt to technology, or importantly how technology should be adapted to them to meet their needs, their requirements, limitations. And as I found over the years, certainly since visiting NASA, that it doesn't matter whether the world is real or virtual. The same human factors, applications, and principles, the way we see, the way we hear, the way we smell, the way we touch, applies in the virtual world just as much as it does in the real world. So it's putting the humans first, and then making sure the technology has something to offer, not just glibly pushing technology onto humans in the hope that it'll work.
So we will get into XR, mixed reality, with my next questions. But first of all, for those that don't know the term, what is mixed reality, Bob?
it's interesting. I've been having a bit of an argument on social media about that again this very day. To me, mixed reality, it's very straightforward. We know what virtual reality is. That's interacting with purely three-dimensional virtual worlds, maybe with haptics and touch, maybe with sound, maybe with smell. We'll talk about smell a bit later. We know what augmented reality is. That's superimposing virtual images onto the real world to make the real world more informative. Now, to me, mixed reality is probably the most potent branch of this science or this discipline that we can be researching at the moment. It's about taking objects in the real world and using those real physical objects to make the virtual world more believable. So, in, for example, our medical emergency response team project with the British Medical, the Defence Medical Association or Defence Medical Specialists, we have a real casualty mannequin on a real stretcher with real medical equipment, but we have that in a blue screen enclosure so that when the individual wearing the modified headset looks around, anything that's blue is, let's say, the inside of a virtual helicopter. Anything that's not blue is real. It's the real mannequin. But because you have a camera on the front of your headset, when you look down, you see your real hands. And when you reach out with your real hands, you touch the real mannequin. Okay, so we're not talking about crazy, expensive, unreliable haptics gloves. We're talking about real hand, real physical object, touch. And that to me is what mixed reality is. It's blending the best of the real to make the virtual more believable.
Nice. So for those, again, who are not that informed on mixed reality and similar technologies, could you use an example of a family? How will the technology impact daily routines of a family, for example?
From a family perspective, yes, it's going to be quite difficult to do that because the technology is still not as accessible as it could be. And mixed reality is probably currently for very specialist training applications as opposed to family circumstances. But if you look at virtual reality, and possibly to some extent augmented, then I think in the future, and not too distant future, we'll be looking at remote learning, so education, particularly important in the current COVID-19 situation. So being able to take school children, well, not even school children, but school children and their families on virtual field trips. Take them to, and that's one of the reasons why I'm a great lover of virtual heritage, because we can use virtual heritage, for example, to make the invisible visible, as we've been doing with our Mayflower project for the 400th commemoration of the Mayflower sailing. Holiday choices, again, nothing unusual there. So being able to look at your destination as a family before you travel, again, not particularly relevant in the current climate, but certainly something that's worth bearing in mind. Healthcare consultations, so being able to interact with virtual avatars of healthcare specialists, possibly underpinned by AI and a strong understanding of basic symptoms. And certainly we're seeing in the UK that you can't always get a doctor's appointment even by telephone. So having a kind of synthetic doctor is a good development. Relaxation. We've done a lot of work looking at the use of virtual reality, scenes of nature, to help people relax, whether they're school teachers, whether they're National Health Service, NHS personnel, and even people at the end of their life, letting them escape into a virtual world and experience the countryside, particularly if you're in a city. People talk about virtual shopping. Many years ago, in the 1990s, we developed the virtual supermarket, and it was fun. We actually designed it really to help supermarket companies explore how they could lay out their spaces to disseminate information about products and to make the products more accessible. Whether or not, I remember speaking to my dear late mum about virtual shopping, and she said, well, if I can't pick up a piece of bread or a loaf of bread, or I can't pick up a vegetable, and if I can't squeeze it or I can't smell the freshness, I don't want to know. So jury's out on virtual shopping. And the other sometimes controversial area that people talk about when it comes to family participation is, for example, news. Being able to participate immersively in a news production. So, can people get more of a sensation of the suffering of others, the plight of the rainforest, problems with climate change, problems with animal species becoming extinct, by immersing them as a family into a virtual rainforest, and they didn't experience the problems firsthand. So again, these are all very contentious, and you could debate them for quite some time. But I think it's something where we may see some developments in virtual reality, not so much mixed, but virtual reality in the future. But we've got a way to go before that.
Yeah, these are amazing, interesting visions and examples. And one example you just named was a synthetic doctor. And I would like to get to that because I think that's an interesting concept. And actually last week, we as Samsung Next media tech team, we had a discussion with colleagues from the US, from other groups, and we're discussing this concept of the metaverse. We will come to that in a couple of minutes. But we were discussing the implications of the metaverse for different industries and sectors. And actually, we discussed also the implications for healthcare. And then we had this discussion, like, will there be synthetic doctors, psychologists, for example, you will consult in a virtual world? Do you think that will be the case, really? So
it's already there. I mean, I've seen examples of virtual doctors who are actually programmed to respond, to generate emotions based on the way in which the patient is looking. So, for example, if you can do facial tracking, if you can do eye movement, if you can record the sound of their voice, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about things like privacy. But if you can record, if you can give them wearables to record their physiological sense or their physiological status, and you've got the camera-based facial tracking, facial recognition systems to look at their emotional status, then why not? Why not endow a virtual doctor to respond sympathetically and empathically with a real patient? I think healthcare to me has been one of the biggest challenge areas for virtual reality ever since I got involved in healthcare back in the 1990s. But as we are seeing, more and more instances of people requiring regular healthcare consultations, and that's certainly true as the population becomes much older, I think we're going to see quite a lot of potential there.
Bob, now a classic question: mass adoption. Mass adoption of VR and XR still feels some way away. What do you think the industry needs to do to speed this up? And when will we see mass adoption? What do you think?
Right. I'm not sure. I don't think we're going to be seeing mass adoption for a good number of years, I have to say. I mean, the industry has to do an awful lot more than it is doing at the moment. There's a lot of hype out there. We need less intrusive technology. Okay, so we need headsets or wearables or glasses that are not as bulky as they are today. The Oculus Quest 2 is a great step forward. The Oculus Quest was a great step forward because suddenly you had an onboard computer. You were not breaking your neck every time you tried to walk away from your PC screen. So again, less intrusive tech that makes one feel as if one is still in a simulation. I often get very, very frustrated and angry on social media when I hear people claiming that they've invented or they have the latest example of the Star Trek holodeck. We are nowhere near a holodeck. I wish we were. I wish we could walk around in a virtual world, walk around in a metaverse, which is say we will come to, and be able to touch and smell and hear and interact with believable virtual humans, believable virtual creatures. Who knows, walk up to a virtual bar from your history and try out different kinds of synthetic alcohol or synthetic drinks. But no, the display side of things is still holding us back. The haptic side, the relaying of touch and force to the human is still very primitive. It still relies on clunky, wearable gloves that are based on electromagnetics or piezoelectric transducers or electromechanics that try to restrain or put pressure on skin, which doesn't satisfy the numerous physiological sensors that exist in different parts of the skin across the body. So again, there's some fun gizmos out there, but in terms of them being credible deliverers of credible touch, no, we're not there yet. Smell. Now, this is a passion of mine, is actually introducing smell into virtual world. I think, again, to get mass adoption and to get acceptability, we have to deliver convincing multi-sensory experiences, not just vision with a games controller, not just a little bit of haptics, not just a little bit of sound. It has to be a very, very rich multi-sensory experience. Smell is a challenge. We've investigated smell. We've evaluated a number of products over the years for our healthcare and some of our defense projects, and really we're still way behind the curve to where I hoped we would be with smell. As we found out with particularly with my foreign students, and I've interacted with Americans, with Japanese, with Chinese, with Indians, and nobody smells a synthetic smell in the way that they expect to smell that smell. If you understand what I mean, it's very cultural. One smell to an American individual will be different if that smell is presented to a British participant. So yes,
but you have AI-driven targeted smells, individualized, personalized smells.
Well, you could do. I've yet to see that. I think being able to personalize smells, that's an even bigger challenge, to be able to deliver the smells in an unintrusive way and to remove the smells when you need to. That's also something that the systems today do very well.
Yeah.
And finally, I mean, we need evidence. We need more open evidence that this works. I constantly, again, get very angry at the number of overhyped claims about technologies, hardware and software we see online, and people saying, well, we've had 2 or 3 people or maybe a handful of people try this and they liked it. And then the chief executive of the company comes and says something that's very geared towards PR. Yeah. But is there real evidence out there? There's not that much.
So Bob, you touched the topic of hardware, of devices, and I've read that your dream hardware is basically also my dream hardware, and that is a pair of glasses, not too dissimilar to a pair of standard reading glasses that allow you to do basically everything. But what are your thoughts on the more extreme hardware technologies, such as research and development into chips for implanting?
Yeah.
Is this a step too far?
Well, personally, I actually think it is too. I think it is a step too far. I mean, it's been coming for years. I remember, again, in the 90s and the 2000s, there was a guy. He's now, I think, deputy vice chancellor at Coventry University. A guy called Kevin Warwick, who was described. He was described as the world's first cyborg, and he was implanting chips into his body and claiming all kinds of experiences with his partner, who was also implanted with chips over the internet. But that's another story. I think it was interesting. It was very much a gimmick at the time.
Interesting guy, by the way. We invited him as guest speaker to a tech event that we organized. Very interesting guy.
He's an interesting guy. I think on occasions he takes some of these things a little bit too far. I mean, the problem we've got is that we currently, even with the tech that's being researched on both sides of the Atlantic, we've got no idea about the physiological, psychological consequences of being so closely interfaced technology. And for example, we've got no idea if that technology could be hacked. So for example, if you've got chip-based devices, silicon-based devices inside your body, could they be susceptible to viruses? Could they be susceptible to hacking externally? So you could do, for example, you could influence the stimuli that the people are being shown or being presented with. It could be explicit influencing. It could be subliminal, really, and really that would influence their perceptions of the world and ultimately would influence their behaviors. Now, when you come to things like disability, people who are born with disabilities or people with, for example, degenerative diseases, then yes, then there is a very strong argument which says, let's try and make their life as enjoyable and as participative as possible. But I think and again, with a lot of my criticisms, this may be an age thing, but I do think currently trying to turn us all into Borg is probably a little bit on the extreme side.
Yeah.
But it will happen. It will happen.
Bob, it's time to speak about the metaverse. Because before we dive into it, could you give us your definition of this concept called metaverse?
It's a multi-dimensional concept, isn't it? I mean, I remember reading Snow Crash, as indeed as everybody else. And we've heard Johnny Mnemonic, and we've seen Ready Player One, etc., etc. So it's one of those terms that is also misused as a form of overhyped marketing in VR. But to me, I suppose the metaverse is probably it's a collection of simulated environments, and some of those environments might be representative of the real world. Some of them may be more sort of esoteric or fantasy-like. But all these worlds are based within a dynamically changing, real-time online environment. So you're typically going to be looking at an alternative reality, which exists and evolves continuously, and in parallel with our reality, our real reality, if you like. And it has no boundaries. I mean, as for example, with Second Life, it could even have its own financial structure, its own markets. So it's literally another community.
Second Life, that's a good keyword, because in our earlier conversations, you mentioned that the idea of a metaverse is not something that you are a huge fan of, specifically referring to the Second Life experience you had. Can you tell us what happened and why did it put you off of the concept of such a completely immersive parallel universe and way of life?
It hasn't put me off 100%, but it has put me off taking part in the many sort of virtual social gatherings that you're seeing at the moment, that people are trying to convince people to go to conferences. I mean, I've refused to attend conferences where everyone's in avatar form. And what happened in Second Life, and I suppose it's an age thing, it's something to do with my age. But what happened in Second Life was I was invited to give a presentation at the so-called Serious Games Institute in Coventry in the UK. And that was going to be, it wasn't held in Second Life in terms of everyone having an avatar and turning up. So I turned up to the institute. I was filmed. It was it was actually very, very poorly coordinated. But the thing that really gave me problems is that there are people dressed and avatars in so many really out of this world designs, flying in and out of my presentation, hovering over my head as I was trying to convey some information about the serious projects that we're involved in. People were disappearing, and it was just complete chaos. It was metaverse chaos, and so I thought, no, yeah, I really want to. I mean, when it comes to the metaverse, or where would I prefer to spend my time? I have to say that I want to be in a world where I can see and apply my own interpretations. You know, if you give me the choice between a metaverse scene of the countryside and a 3-hour trip to my favorite place in England, which is Dartmoor in the southwest, I mean, I will go there because I can sit there and I am not influenced by whoever's programmed the world. I'm not influenced by very simple schematic type objects. I'm not influenced by crazy dismembered avatars. I'm seeing the world, I'm perceiving the world on my terms, and I can apply it and use my imagination on my own terms. So these crazy conference-based social media, social settings that I'm somewhat critical of, I do feel anti those, but in the same breath, I do see the metaverse concept being very, very influential in healthcare, in collaborative engineering, and some of the serious sides. I mean, for example, NVIDIA have just recently announced the Omniverse, and that's specifically focusing on engineering. That, to me, good idea. I can see the logic,
yeah,
financial aspects of that.
Yeah. how to overcome metaverse chaos. That could be a great article, actually. So, do you see the metaverse as an opportunity for mass implementation of VR? Isn't that like a positive thing? Probably.
I mean, yeah, it will happen. There's no doubt about it that the metaverse concept and the way it's evolving is, yes, people becoming more involved in this alternative reality called the metaverse will, in part, it won't be the only thing, but it will in part will stimulate a more widespread adoption of virtual reality. When that will happen, I don't know. I think I probably won't be around by the time it happens. I will probably be in my own metaverse up there.
Let's see. So a lot of the work you do in the field of VR is exceptionally positive, and something that I think we need to be talking more about, the positive slides, the great work. But especially, like now switching to the other side, in consideration of the negative press a lot of AI-driven technologies is receiving in the run-up to the US elections now, I think we also should consider the risks, the challenges that we will have. So do you think there needs to be more policies, ethics in place to ensure that these technologies are not misused, and what could that look like?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and it's one that's been asked many times over the last, well, certainly the 3 decades that I've been involved. And I think people are always crying out for policies. People could get concerned about when will individuals, particularly individuals who may have existing psychological problems, when will they not be able to distinguish between a virtual world and the real world? And if they can get away with doing things in the virtual world, will that encourage them to act irresponsibly in the real world? And I say these have been issues that have been debated since the dawn of virtual reality. I'm not sure, to be honest, how far we've actually progressed. I think the reality really is that it doesn't matter what organization comes up with accepted practices or principles or mental health guidelines. I think there's always going to be those. There will always be those who take the technology to extremes. And I fear that there is nobody, individual groups or organizations, that can really realistically put controls on that. It's a daunting prospect. It's a worrying prospect, and all we can do, and certainly my little team, all we can really do is lead by example, and that's make sure, as again, by emphasizing the human factor, by continuously shouting at people not to get carried away with technology, deliver what it is that particular group of human needs, and being focused on what we call duty of care for our end users, and that's particularly the case in healthcare and in the defense community. I think leading by example is the way to show how we should responsibly adopt virtual reality or XR generally to the population. But in terms of policies and ethics, and I think that's an uphill battle that I'm afraid no one's going to win.
Okay. So, I mean, as you mentioned before, privacy, especially in virtual environments, big topic, right, going forward.
Yeah.
Consulting the synthetic doctor.
No, privacy is a huge it's a huge issue. I don't know if you saw, but this month, this very month, Stanford University came up with some very, very concerning statistics, and when this applies to, let's not mention the group, but I mean there's a lot of concern about one particular headset that's come onto the market and how invasive that will be in terms of capturing people's behaviors. And that, well, Stanford has found, and okay, it wasn't true virtual reality they used, it was 360 environments, but they found, I think they used over 500 participants in their study, and all they did was track the head movement and the movement of the hand controllers when they're being placed. So it's literally just tracking body movement, and their tracking system, which I think is AI based, was able to identify 95% of the users within 5 minutes of it being used. Now that's absolutely frightening, and we're not just talking about movement. I mean, at the moment we've got headsets that are coming onto the market that have got EEG brainwave sensing devices. That's not new. They've been around for the last 3 or 4 years. Eye movement, pupil diameter, facial movements, speech recording, galvanic skin response. In the very near future, sampling cortisol to see how stressed you are. There's a big thrust towards putting all of these psychophysiological sensors into virtual reality equipment. So you're going to be able you're going to be giving up an awful lot of your psychophysiological data. To whom? We don't know. What are they going to do with that? Will that be used to adapt the virtual world, to scare you witless or to make you calmer, or is it going to be used for some other unseen, unseen purpose? Privacy is a very, very concerning issue going forward, I believe.
Before we get even more negative and into more negative hormones, let's go back to fun stuff.
Yeah.
On a more fun note, what online games are you playing right now?
I don't.
If any.
I don't play any online game. I haven't, seriously. I don't have the time. At the moment, this year with our projects particularly has been completely crazy, and it doesn't look as if it's getting any better. That's not to say I'm not a games player. I have played games in the past. I look forward to the time when I get a break so I can play Half-Life Alyx. I've just been a huge Half-Life fan, and I've been desperately praying for Half-Life 3 to come for years and years and years. And now they've brought out Half-Life Alyx in VR form. I've just got to do it. I've just got to do it. Whenever I've
+1 here.
+1, you as well.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I've got other downtime. When I've got downtime, I do other things. Like I'm a great passionate builder of science fiction models. Some of which you can probably even see behind me. You've got the Nostromo from Alien Zoo. You've got Battlestar Galactica there. Various other models that I'm currently building, which is
that's real physical stuff.
Oh yeah, physical stuff, physical, hands-on, fine detail.
You can touch it.
You can touch
crazy.
It.
Sounds crazy.
I come from an era. Where all the science fiction TV programs and films were models. They were based on models, not CGI. So anyway, and I still love playing the old genre games as well. Things like Quake, Heretic, with we can't see it's backwards, don't mind. It's The Colony by David Smith, which came out in the late 1980s, and this is still got, I think, somewhere. It's still got the 5 1/4 inch disc, the 5 1/4 inch floppy, and the Colony is something I actually use in my lectures because that was a major step forward in 3D by a guy who then went on to develop a virtual reality toolkit. Fantastic game, absolutely fantastic game. And things like, say, Quake and Heretic.
Yeah,
sorry?
funny enough, the tech event that I co-organized that I just mentioned, the other guest we had there was John Romero, who's the designer of Quake.
Quake,
right? Yeah.
But Quake and subsequently Heretic were just absolutely fantastic. And it wasn't just the images at the time. These were games with real stories. These were games with fantastic sound and music effects. Absolutely fantastic. To make you, if anything would make the hairs on your arm go up, it would be the sound. So these guys were absolutely inspirational.
I agree. Bob, speaking about inspirational people and companies, are there any startups in the XR field that you would consider as ones to watch?
Yeah, again, this is a question I'm going to struggle with because we see an awful lot of reports and claims and PR from startups online. And I have to be completely honest with you and say I don't think I could actually pin down one startup company where I would actually shout, keep an eye on this one. The whole market and the whole startup infrastructure at the moment is so fragile in terms of companies offering a product or a product range or that's actually got it's actually got a future development potential. So we see an awful lot of startups who have a great idea. They're young, they're very enthusiastic youngsters who may not have any significant business perspective or business sense, to be completely frank, and they come up with an individual concept that they haven't really planned for the future development of this or the maintenance of this or how it will evolve and become something that's sustainable. But they still seem to attract significant investments for those actually poorly developed ideas or concepts. And that's one thing that baffles me too, is in that a lot of investors don't seem to be doing their homework or learning the lessons from the previous 3 decades when it comes to believing what they're being told by these enthusiastic startups. So they get these large levels of investment. They do an awful lot of playing around with their one product. They go to international conferences, either virtually or live, and then all of a sudden, bang! They learn about the word cash flow. Half of my career, half of my 34-year career, was as a director of a virtual reality company, and I know what it's like. At a time when there was no chance of investment, nobody believed in this technology, no matter how well you say it. I know what it's like to have to fire people because of cash flow problems. So we'll see. I mean, if I was on investment boards, I would be a lot stricter than a lot of people, I have to say, simply because I think that there are a lot of questions that investors do not ask of these people, and I think there needs to be a reality check, a serious reality check, before the kind of investments, the millions of dollars of investments that we're seeing, get put into something that really doesn't warrant that amount of investment.
Okay, no, I definitely know who to ask when we do due diligence when looking at a VR startup. So, Bob, last question. Time for a shout out. Who are the VR/mixed reality experts you appreciate most?
Oh, right. Okay. Now, again, it's something like the startup issue. I mean, there's not any group or individual person today that I would point out and say, this guy or this gal is the future. But I do have my 4. I do have my 4 heroes. And
the big four. The big 4.
The big 4. Big 4. Number 1, Tom Furness, Professor Tom Furness. As you know, he founded the Human Interface Technology Laboratory. So it comes as no surprise as my team is called the Human Interface Technologies team. Tom and I appeared on the first ever UK BBC TV program called Colonizing Cyberspace, would you believe, about virtual reality. He's ex-United States Air Force. He set up a lot of the research as a scientist at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And he was a guy behind the famous Super Cockpit, advanced cockpit program, where a lot of things like brainwave recording and eye tracking and all these technologies were being researched again back in the 70s and 80s. Bob Jacobson, I've always been a fan. We've been a fan of each other. He's currently a president of a company I think it's in Tucson, Arizona, a non-profit organization called Atelier Tomorrow. He was the co-founder of the HIT Lab at Washington State with Tom Furness, and was involved in, for example, getting something called the Virtual Worlds Consortium going. And Virtual Worlds Consortium was for many years the place to go if you wanted assets or information on virtual reality. Bob, I always remember something Bob told me many years ago, but again, back in the 1990s, and it's something that I've kept close to my heart ever since. When he started his first company in virtual reality, he said he was going out and trying to sell to companies, large companies, important aerospace, defense, and what have you. And he said, just the companies that I speak to, they all want to be involved in VR. They just don't want to be the first. And I've identified with that ever since. And it's one of the reasons why, before we even go out to a company, we try to put together a very simple concept demonstration. Not go bang on the door and say, hey, look, you've got to have this virtual reality thing. We try to do something that's focused. And I got Bob Jackson to thank for that. Two gals, got two guys, two gals. Sandra K. Helsel. Sandra K. Helsel. Sandra is one of the, I think, the most important women in VR names that's out there. I first did a presentation for her in New York many years ago, and she was also behind editing and pulling together the first virtual reality marketplace document in 1993. She's still active today. She's part of a bigger organizational communications practice, but she's still involved in virtual reality on and off, and again, a great heroine of mine in the VR world. And the final lady is Beth Marcus. I've always been, Beth has experienced the roundabout, the ups and downs of virtual reality in the same way as I have. I first met Beth in Santa Barbara back in it was again well over 25 years, maybe more. In Santa, it was the first big virtual reality conference in Santa Barbara, and yeah, Fuchs was there, Jaron Lanier was there. I mean, everyone who was everyone, who became everyone, was at this conference. And Beth came up to me when she was then the chief executive of a company called Exos, and she had developed an exoskeleton, not so much a glove, but an exoskeleton structure called the Exos, the Exos Handmaster. And she was involved in, like me, in VR and robotics for many years. She worked for NASA, and she currently today, I believe, she's a principal engineer for Amazon Robotics. So she's again carried on in that theme, and those are my four.
Great, thanks so much, Bob. I enjoyed our talk a lot, and let's see, we'll be able to meet in the metaverse at some point. And I don't mean your afterlife metaverse, right?
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I don't intend going this soon, but you never know. I may yet.
Please.
I may yet be dragged kicking and screaming into a metaverse somewhere, sometime in the not too distant future. So we'll try and meet there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Bob.
That's a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.